few hours ago now, we were treated to the trailer for arguably one of the most nostalgic franchises in animation history. A new addition to the Wallace and Gromit universe with Wallace and Gromit: A Vengeance Most Foul, which for those lucky people in the UK, gets a release date of Christmas Day, but the rest of us have to wait until the 3rd of January 2025 for it to release on Netflix. I get it, but at the same time, I can't help but feel slightly resentful that two of my favourite British classics are getting an early release compared to the rest of the world. I was already struggling for the wait for Paddington 3, and now they're going to throw me this curveball? I'm suffering. Send thoughts and prayers. Anyway, before I dive into the 52-second trailer, which is going to take a lot of extrapolating and pulling ideas out of thin air, I figured I'd lengthen the video by talking about how friggin' awesome Wallace and Gromit is, and why it's so beloved. I know, I'm making you wait for the breakdown, but I'm a filthy YouTuber with bills to pay, sue me. In case you weren't aware, Wallace and Gromit is kind of an old franchise. I know I'm surely making boomers and zennials cry with that statement, but it's 2024. It's almost 40 years old. We got to accept it. I know I'm going to be crying when some 25-year-old's talking about how old Shrek is when they release Shrek 10 or whatever. The first of 3 stellar short films released in 1989. A grand day out where Wallace builds a rocket to fly to the moon to get some cheese for his crackers. Once they get there, there's some shenanigans with a robot who reads a magazine that Wallace has and wants to travel back to Earth so he can ski. Chaos ensues because Wallace thinks the robot's angry with him for thieving cheese, and they leave without the crazed robot, but he manages to build his own skis from the offcuts of the rocket, and he happily zooms around the moon, so it's all happy in the end. The short performed pretty well for Aardman, winning a BAFTA and being nominated for an Academy Award, so of course, this led to them making 2 more, which would go on to win Academy Awards, and these were The Wrong Trousers and A Close Shave. The Wrong Trousers released first, but because the upcoming film is leading off of that plot, I figure I'd talk about A Close Shave first. This short released in 1995 and is actually the debut of another Aardman character, Shaun the Sheep, who goes on to be, contentiously, the most successful character in all of Aardman's productions. I mean, the TV series is still going after, 17 years with movies, specials, at least one TV show spin-off I'm aware of. I do feel torn even saying it because Wallace and Gromit are so near and dear to my heart, and to me, no other Aardman production or character could be possibly more successful than them, but the numbers don't lie. Anyway, the story basically revolves around this wool shop where Wallace falls for the shopkeeper, but her dog uses dodgy practices to get their wool. He steals the blueprints for Wallace's knitting invention that shears sheep and makes jumpers out of the wool. Gromit, of course, discovers all of this and is framed by Preston the dog and sent to jail. Wallace breaks him out with the help of Shaun and the endless sheep Preston's been abusing, after which they see that Preston then turns on his owner, the shopkeeper, and plans on turning her and the sheep into dog food. It's revealed that this dog's built a much larger version of Wallace's invention, which Wallace gets stuck in, and Gromit has to rescue them all, revealing that Preston was actually a robot dog the shopkeeper's father invented. Preston is then killed by Shaun, and Wallace builds a much nicer version of him for the shopkeeper, but the romance doesn't last because she's allergic to cheese. I feel like this one's got to be the wackiest of them all, but perfectly encapsulates the complete randomness and hilariousness that plague Wallace and Gromit's lives. There was a short release 13 years later called A Matter of Loaf and Death, which I have seen, but I can't really remember much of it. But apparently the premise involves Wallace and Gromit getting caught up in some murder mystery case, as they work at a bakery and Wallace is targeted. So it's up to Gromit to save him. It received a BAFTA and was nominated for an Academy Award, so I assume it's good. Also in 2005, Wallace and Gromit's first feature film, The Curse of the Were-Rabbit, was released, which is a childhood favourite of mine. So much so that I'm pretty sure I made a video about it years ago, maybe even clamouring for another Wallace and Gromit film. So clearly, I need to be thanked for putting that out into the universe and succeeding in getting us a brand new film. Even though the story goes for considerably longer than any other Wallace and Gromit production, the humour doesn't get tired, and the suspense and stakes are still there. Honestly, you'd be forgiven for thinking that a movie based on the crazy hijinks that Wallace and Gromit consistently endure wouldn't make for a good feature-length film. That it would get tired and overexposed, but it genuinely was good. The short story of the plot is that Wallace and Gromit run a humane pest control business, and in the hopes of reducing the damage they're causing to the town, Wallace attempts to brainwash the bunnies they've captured to not crave vegetables so they can be reformed and released. The stakes are heightened because there's a big vegetable competition coming up, and I mean that quite literally. It's a big vegetable competition. On top of that, Wallace is enamored with Lady Tottington, who's all about the humane treatment of animals. This all goes horribly wrong when the brainwaves of a rabbit and Wallace are switched, and Wallace begins turning into a monster were-rabbit, ravishing all the vegetable gardens in the town, whilst the rabbit grows into a slightly creepy anthropomorphic version of Wallace. Victor, a rival for Totty's affections, wants to kill the were-rabbit, even more so once he discovers it's Wallace, and a whole battle commences where Gromit sacrifices himself after a literal dogfight, by the way, that honestly to me kind of rivaled the train fight in The Wrong Trousers, only for Gromit to be saved by the were-rabbit Wallace. Wallace dies, but then turns back to normal, comes back to life, Gromit's fine, the rabbits are released at Toddy's estate to live in sanctuary, and it's once again happy days. Basically, the premise of Wallace and Gromit is that Wallace is a lovable klutz that's really intelligent and yet really stupid at the same time, to the point that he can't really do anything at all without the help of his long-suffering beagle Gromit. They go through the most ludicrous situations, but always pull through, and it just has this inherent British charm and humour that can't be beat. Pretty similar stuff can be found in all of Aardman's other works, but Wallace and Gromit just has something special about it. So the short that this film's a sequel to is called The Wrong Trousers, which released 4 years after the first short, and I would say is my and many others' personal favourite. Also, before I get into it, it says that it released in the US before the UK? I know, I was complaining a short while ago about getting it late, but why was it releasing early elsewhere? Madness! Anyway, the story centres around these mechanical trousers that Wallace gives to Gromit so it can take him for walks. At the same time, Wallace also lets this penguin, who has a red glove on his head, which he uses to disguise himself as a chicken, rent out the spare room. This penguin, named Feathers McGraw, is a master criminal and manages to kick Gromit out of the house and use Wallace to unwittingly rob a diamond from a museum in the trousers. When Wallace gets back, him and Gromit enter into a battle with the penguin chicken in the epic model train sequence, capturing him and take him to the police to be arrested. This short, I feel like, is the most famous and is the most beloved by all, hence why the upcoming movie is a sequel to this very short. So now we've got quite the extensive run-through of Wallace and Gromit franchise, let's dive into the trailer and see what type of plot we can construct. It starts off with Gromit peering out of his window and looking around with narration overlaying discussing a crime wave. A reporter with many protesters behind her goes to interview Wallace at his front door, telling the audience he's an evil inventor. Wallace later states that he's innocent, interplayed with a few different shots, one of an eye poking out of the artwork of himself and Gromit, and another of Gromit barging through the front door armed with a cricket bat. There's a few more shots of Wallace looking down into the basement from outside, and crime tape strewn around the house. Gromit peers through the lock in the front door where there's blue and red flashing and it seems a garden gnome steps in front. There's a cork board with a load of strings attached and a photo of Wallace and a garden gnome at the centre. And I would assume the garden gnome is named Norbert, as a business card beneath it advertises Wallace and Norbert's gnome improvements. A few more scenes flash past, one of a photographer taking a picture. One thought seems to be a type of submarine with a rubber duck on top coming out of either a rundown aquarium or a deep paddling pool. Gromit drifts onto the road in a motor car, with what seems to be a small electrical tower and satellite dish on top. We see Gromit balancing on top of some ship that's gone sideways along a bridge, hanging on for dear life with various vegetables scattered around. Gromit once again has a net and is standing outside a zoo, followed by Feathers McGraw playing an organ with a newspaper clipping titled Diamond Geezers Catch Thief. He then sips out of a mug that says World's Best Boss, and we get the title screen, Wallace and Gromit's Vengeance Most Foul, which of course the release date is the 3rd of January. Now all of this seems a bit random at first glance, which is good for a trailer because you don't want to be spoiled too heavily for this type of thing. But the description at least gives us a better idea of what's in store. It reads, from the brilliant Aardman and 4-time Academy Award-winning director Nick Park and Emmy Award-nominated Merlin Crossingham comes Wallace and Gromit Vengeance Most Foul. In this next installment, Gromit's concern that Wallace is becoming too dependent on his inventions proves justified when Wallace invents a smart gnome that seems to develop a mind of its own. When it emerges that a vengeful figure from the past might be masterminding things, it falls to Gromit to battle sinister forces and save his master, or Wallace may never be able to invent again. So putting some scenes together with the context of the description, here's what I'd hedge my bets on. Wallace has started a business of robotic security gnomes. Over time, the gnomes have gotten too smart and are probably causing havoc and stealing things, hence why there's signs at the protest in the beginning of the trailer saying, "Where's my stuff?" And the statement that Wallace is an evil inventor, as the public probably presume that if he's intelligent enough to invent robotic security gnomes, he's intelligent enough to hatch some grand scheme to use these gnomes to rob them. I assume these are similar to the robotic security gnomes from Curse of the Were-Rabbit. I don't remember if they're used in any of the other shorts, but they're definitely in the movie. And I think it's clear that Feather McGraw has altered the gnomes somehow to frame Wallace and Gromit as revenge, and then uses the gnomes to attack their house after all of this, hence the crime scene. I'd also suggest that he's most likely kidnapped Wallace, hence why Gromit's doing all the investigating, and going to the zoo where Feathers McGraw was sent after they captured him. The other scenes I'd most likely attribute to either the gnomes/Feathers robbing the people that bought Wallace's product. Then we have the submarine scene, and Gromit's driving around the town on the motor car or on the ship along the bridge, which I'd say is him trying to stop Feathers. Probably trying to stop him from attempting to kill Wallace. To me, sounds like a pretty solid plot. I'm very excited for the movie. I hope it's far better than Chicken Run 2, because I was also excited for that, but I hated it so much. The original creator is still working on it, and whilst he was involved with Chicken Run 2, there he was only an executive producer, and I put that down more to his extensive work with Aardman, just as a name than anything else. I have faith. So now I'll throw it to you guys. Are you excited for Wallace and Gromit Vengeance Most Foul? How do you think the story's going to play out? Do you think my theories make any sense? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.